Okay. So, welcome to another episode of Learning for Truth and Love. I'm truly excited to have our guest today, Dr. Jomo Mutegi. And I usually, as always, I like to have our participants talk about themselves. So, Dr. Mutegi, welcome to Learning for Truth and Love. So, I want to start by having you talk a little bit about yourself in terms of your career, your profession, and then talk about yourself in the context of being a father of Black boys.
Sure. I first want to say thank you. I appreciate the invitation to come share with you and with your listeners. I'll start just by giving you a bit of background on myself. I'm a professor of science education, currently work at Old Dominion University in Southeast Virginia. And in this position, this professional position, I study the teaching and learning of science, and I teach courses to future and current teachers who might be teaching science. Sometimes these are science teachers, sometimes they're elementary teachers. My specific area of research is centered around the science teaching and learning of Black children in particular. And when I say Black, I'm referring to Black children no matter where we're found on the planet. So if we're Black in America, we might study African Americans. If we're Black in Cuba, we might study Afro-Cubans. If we're Black in Canada, we might study Afro-Canadians. But I take a Pan-Africanist perspective, and I engage in this study with the assumption that throughout the planet, there's a thread of experience that ties us together as people of African descent. And that's the core of my professional teaching and research.
Wow.
Personally, I'm the father of two Black boys, as you mentioned. And some folks will think I'm crazy because one of them is 29 and the other, well, he's about to be 29 later this month in about a week. And the other
Okay.
will be 10 in about a week. And
Okay.
so
Wow.
quite literally, as one was leaving the house to go to college, the other one was being birthed into the house. And so
Wow.
though they're brothers, their experience growing up has in both instances been as only children for all intents and purposes. And so much of
Wow.
my parenting insight is informed by my work as an educator, but also it's been shaped by my experience as a young man growing up and the insight and guidance that was given to me by my mother. And then just a disposition I have to be reflective about my own experiences as a child and teenager and then as an adult.
Okay. Wow. Now, I'm so curious. I'm curious about these questions. Well, I'm going to make a note of them if you see me writing. I'm curious about how your parenting has been shaped, even by your position. But I want to hold off on that just for a second, and talk about your experience as a parent. As a Black father, number one, what do you think are some, things you've experienced that maybe other fathers might not have had to experience? So talk about your fathering experience.
Yeah, that's difficult. It's the reason I say it's difficult is because I can speak
Mhm.
pretty clearly about experiences that I've had, but I
Mhm.
can't speak to what other people may not have had. And quite honestly, I don't feel that
Okay, that's
I'm
true. Makes
terribly
sense.
unique. I think that
Mhm.
much of what I've experienced, it's probably in front of other fathers to experience. Whether they realize it or not, whether they're reflective about it or not, I wouldn't assume that some of the more foundational experiences aren't common. I'll share a quick story with you if you don't mind. Have
No,
I lost
awesome.
you?
No,
So,
I'm here.
okay.
Stories are great.
So there's one instance where my older son, he was maybe sixth grade, I think, and he had done
Mhm.
something. I don't remember what it was, but I know it was driving me crazy. And I have an uncle who used to cut our hair. And so my uncle and I were speaking on the phone, and in greeting each other, he said, "How's it going? How's the boy?" And I didn't tell him what was happening, but he must have heard it in my voice. And the first thing he said to me was, "I know you want to kill him,
Okay.
but don't do that." He said, "We were both young that age once too." And he counseled me without me even telling him what the situation was. And he was right on point. And so the reason I share that story is because,
Mhm.
again, I'm going to this idea that my experiences are not that unique. It's common enough that another father
Mhm.
who had gone through it with his own son, my cousin, could recognize my response as a
Mhm.
father and knew what I was dealing with and was able to counsel me to better fatherhood in that moment. And so the short answer for you is that I don't think that my experience is terribly different from what many other Black fathers would face.
So what exactly happened if you want to share that he was giving you some insights on?
Listen, I don't remember. I don't remember at all what it was, but I can say that
Okay. That's okay. You just remember the
Having
experience of getting the advice. That's all right. It's like
yes,
it takes a village kind of
I will say
idea,
this
right?
though.
Mhm.
I was gonna say, having been a young man and having raised young men, the types of issues that you deal with boys are
Mhm.
fairly simple. Young
Mhm.
men are as boys growing into their minds and their bodies as young men. And many of the conflicts
Mhm.
are just them trying to
Mhm.
exert themselves and you trying to restrain them or trying to help them to develop restraints, a sense of when they should restrain themselves. And so, without knowing the specifics of it, almost guaranteed that is where the conflict was. I don't never had
Okay.
much conflict outside of that space with either of my sons.
Okay, that's awesome. So I'll just tell you some experience from my perspective of being a mom. I know that I have spoken to different friends who are, and even peers in the field who are black moms. And so we talk about raising black boys. And oftentimes, our experience, our feelings as black women are very different, are very similar, rather. Our experience as black women are very similar, or should say the same. But oftentimes I would have someone say, it's a little different because your son, my son is black, yours is not really black, even though me as a black mom, I position my son as a black boy, especially he is a black boy standing next to a white boy, right? And so, there are things as a mom I've had to consider. And one of the important things for me is being at a place that not only encourages him and promotes his development, one, number two, allows him to understand more about himself, more about, his African American culture in very positive, self defining ways are, some of the things that I've thought of as a mother. And it's hard to say what part of that is influenced by my experience as a science educator, but I just remember just thinking about, really curious about, well, what is he learning about the African American culture? What is he learning about Black culture? And that being very important to me. I'm curious as to what have you thought about? Even as, I guess the one closest to home now would be your 10-year-old, right? Or almost 10-year-old who is with, at home. But what are some considerations you've had to make, as a father in his education?
Yeah, you mean in general or specifically where it relates to learning about being black?
I'd say either, whichever is more important to you, whichever you want to talk about.
Yeah, so I mean I appreciate that question, and I'll speak to. I know you asked about my younger son, but I'll speak to both. One of the
Mm-hmm.
things that is a challenge for black parents is how to find strong educational spaces. And I have a colleague who does research on black families and education. And her dissertation and subsequent
Mm-hmm.
studies have explored this. It's almost always a choice between what gaps are we going to allow. And I had that same experience as a father.
Mm, yeah.
And so with my older
Mm-hmm.
son, I opted to send him to a strong private school. It was predominantly white. And
Mm-hmm.
my sense was that I can teach him
Mm-hmm.
blackness at home. And so we spent a
Mm-hmm.
lot of time me exposing him to black spaces, black people, black thought and ideology.
Mm-hmm.
And then also there was a lot of coaching of me with him as he's navigating
Mm-hmm.
these white spaces, which are sometimes hostile to black children. I'll just give a couple of
Mm-hmm.
quick examples.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of every day, many parents ask, "How was your day?" And there's a discussion around what happened during the day.
Mm-hmm.
I very intentionally, with my older son, turned this into a daily debrief. And I remember at one point, as he's
Mm-hmm.
getting older and kids become teenagers and not quite as talkative, and I chastised him. I said, "Look, man,
Mm-hmm.
I send you to school every day. Your job is to do reconnaissance. You are to go in there and find out what they're doing and
Mm-hmm.
bring it back. And we're going to plan about how we're going to make life better for ourselves." And he took the chastisement. He kind of laughed, but I think it signaled to him that, okay, this is not just an idle question. We're supposed to do something with this information. And so we were very strategic. He would say, "Here's a situation I'm having with a teacher. Here's why I don't like it." And I would offer, I say, "Okay, I can see two or three things that we can do to address it. I can address it with
Mm-hmm.
the school principal. You can address it in these ways." And I won't say every day, but very consistently throughout the school year, we would
Mm-hmm.
jointly plan how to
Yeah.
move forward. And more than dealing with those specific incidents, it modeled for him how you can address problems. They say
Mhm.
if all you know how to use is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. This practice is showing, look, every problem is not a hammer, is not a nail rather. Sometimes you can use a hammer, sometimes you can use another tool, sometimes you can ignore it. And as time went on, I released more autonomy to him to determine how you want to address this problem. I said I was going to give
Mm.
you a couple of examples because my younger son's personality is a lot different. And so with my older son, we would do this type of planning. I don't know that my younger son has the same outlook. I can say something to my older son when he was young, and he would know what he could share with others and what he couldn't share. My younger son is like a pot with
Mhm.
holes in it. Everything that goes in is going to come out. So the approach has to be a bit different. The end goal can be the same. And so, again, I'm talking about
Yeah.
how, as a father, I work to instill an understanding of
Mhm.
Blackness and positionality. This is one strategy. I would say, in a more formal sense, with both of my sons, my wife and I have been intentional about giving them exposure to Black culture. So we do spend a lot
Mhm.
of time going to museums and not just going and letting
Mm.
them run loose, but going and walking through with them and teaching
Right.
them how to use the museum. So this past spring, we went to Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy, I believe. So he has the White House of the Confederacy is in Richmond, Virginia. We drove up there for a day during spring break and spent time there. And my younger son, he was not terribly interested. They had studied it in school, but he wanted to do other things. And so he said, no, we're going to do other things. But first, we're going through this museum and we're going to read these placards and understand what they mean. And so we did that. And then afterwards, we looked for opportunities to make connections. Oh, remember when we saw this at the museum? Yeah, I remember that. Okay, here's another instance of where we see the same principle at play, whether it's a street name or something we watch in a movie or on television. And so I think these are important experiences for Black parents to provide to their children, sons and daughters.
So, it's interesting you mentioned in the beginning, the debrief after school. I had the same thing. And it's very interesting because I would talk to other parents, because most of because the private school my son was in, my white parents, I especially talked to parents. I shouldn't say I talked to both parents with boys and girls, but eventually after a time, the ones you connect with because you're talking about issues, boys or parents with boys. And so it's interesting to hear a lot of times. I was like, oh, he shares all of that. I was like, yeah, because I was also very intentional with the daily debriefing, and I was also used picking him up from school as an opportunity to debrief, right, and do a lot of listening to understand how his day was and figure out whether or not there were perspectives that I needed to help him to adjust. But it's very interesting you said that because I think I just want to share that that's something I have in common. I'm sure other parents, I could see thinking the same way. Um, you're just using them as opportunities of learning and thinking of ourselves as almost like troubleshooters in a way, right? As you mentioned, which gap do we want him to have? He's going to have a gap, right? Whether it's in a gap in understanding himself and building in healthy ways his identity, or whether it's a gap in schoolwork. And you and I, when we were talking earlier, you were mentioning the same thing as well. It's there's always going to be a gap, and what is that gap is now. And I know sometimes the gaps that we think about, especially the cognitive part, are very common to all, right? Whether or not you're Black or white, sometimes those gaps are just there. But the other type of gap, the one that really, I guess, matters in the end in terms of how we see ourselves, that has that emotional connection. I love that you've been so explicit about it because that's something I've had to develop and I've had to learn. And so one of the things I would end up doing, because that was, I've always envisioned taking him there and having these conversations. I have a friend who, she does a great job of really having these conversations with her daughter, and because she's also a Disney fan, they would sit down and they would actually talk about, oh, but this is what's happening here. So she would use it as an opportunity to have these discussions. Now, I'm not like that, right? I'm not like that, as vocal, and I would sit down and use this as an opportunity for discussion because, I can also see my boy saying, stop talking during a movie or, or something like that. So I'm just curious as to, and I love the museum example, taking him to the museum to really have these discussions. First of all, I'm curious as to what were some even in taking him to museum and even in troubleshooting, what are some things you thought were really important for him to know that you really wanted him to understand, you know, by doing all of this?
One thing I would say uh, about his development as a person within himself that I think is vital is that he embraced virtues. And you could probably pull any list. If you pull a list of say the 25 common virtues, that would be a good list. They're very common. Things like
Mhm.
honesty,
Okay.
integrity, perseverance,
Mhm.
hard work. These are important. Some might say this is not
Mhm.
related to blackness,
Yeah.
but it is. We're in a climate where the inherent or cultural decency that we have developed as a race of people has been consistently eroded through
Mhm.
slavery, through post
Mhm.
slavery, Jim Crow. If you travel to Africa through colonialism, every effort is made by
Mhm.
Western powers to destabilize us as a race of people. And one of the primary attacks
Mhm.
is our character as people. So, how can we
Mm. Mhm.
come together in a productive way if we don't trust each
Mhm.
other, if we're not honest people? It's hard to do. How can we face challenges and overcome challenges if we don't persevere, if we don't have a sense of perseverance? You can't do it. And so
Absolutely.
these basic virtues, which I think, from my understanding of history, we had in spades going back millenniums into antiquity, there's been a consistent onslaught against us. And now I'd say in the past 40, 50 years, we're seeing that we are embracing vice and we're associating that vice with our inherent nature as Black people. That is something that we need to fight against as parents with ourselves and with our children.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's number one.
Mhm. Absolutely.
I think that is more important than any specific facts. I'd rather have a young man who is honest and works hard than one who knows quadratic equations. Man, quadratic equations ain't even that important. But honesty and work hard is always important. So it trumps any of the specific facts that we send our kids to school to learn. Now,
Right.
stepping away from that, when I look at the history and how we have been where we are historically, one of the things that it's important for Black children to learn, to understand, is that the condition we see ourselves in currently is a very small bit of history when we look at the whole of human history. So
Mhm.
historically, Black Africans have been the world leaders in terms of our advanced civilization, our advanced knowledge, and it's incumbent upon us as parents to help our children know not just that as a principle, but some of the specifics of that. My wife and I, we went
Mhm.
on a study tour with Ashra Kwesi to ancient ancient Egypt, Kemet, and
Mm.
it was phenomenal that our ancestors were able to build some of the monuments that they were able to build in the way they were able to build them.
Mhm.
On the
Yeah.
tour, there were masons. I don't mean the fraternal order masons. I mean people that actually work with brick and stone in building
Mhm.
construction. One of the
Yeah.
monuments was we were in the back of the monument. It was a temple actually, and the theme in this temple was medicinal knowledge. So most of the tour group
Mhm.
is looking at one of the stela, which had medical instruments depicted. Another member was on a back wall with a compass, and he held the compass against the wall, and it showed north. It showed perfect magnetic north. When I say
Mhm.
perfect, I mean the needle was on the end. And where we were, that wall was oriented toward the front door. So this temple was constructed so that the front door faced magnetic north. And when he showed members of the group that, we were just in awe. And that was my first introduction to the idea of architectural alignment. And our ancestors were able to align architectural monuments to each other, to the four cardinal directions, to
Mm.
stars, to celestial events. And so this is one example of some of the historical knowledge that we once had. All Black children should know that that's the people we come from. Not so that we can sit back and feel good about what we used to be, but it gives us
Mhm.
an ability to put our current situation in context. We can know that, okay, we are in a slump right now. This is not our normal condition.
Mhm.
And then the task is, what do we need to do to get out of the slump?
Mhm.
All right. So another that leads to the other bit of history that I think is important for Black children to know is that we are in a slump and why we are in the slump. And in this instance, it's impossible, as I look at history and apply logic, it's impossible to get around an idea, the reality that we are in our slump, first and foremost because of what whites have done to us. And
Mm.
then secondarily because of what we have not done for ourselves.
Mm,
And so I'll use a metaphor. Imagine that you are a builder and you're really good at building buildings, and you have a mission. You're going to build, say you build hospitals. You're going to build hospitals throughout the country.
mhm,
Well, you go to New York and you build a hospital. And then you go down to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, you build a hospital. And then you
mhm,
move further west to Columbus and you build a hospital. Well, by the time you get to Columbus, my crew come along and we good destroyers. We destroy the hospital you built in New York.
mm,
And when you leave Columbus and go to Indianapolis, we come to the one you built in Pittsburgh and we destroy that one. And each time you move somewhere else, we come and destroy something else that you've made.
mhm,
The destroyer is guilty for
mhm,
destroying, but you also have culpability because you have not put in place some measure to stop the destroyer from destroying.
mm,
And so, in our current condition, yes, you can't say that there's not a destroyer working to undermine what we are producing for ourselves,
absolutely.
but we are culpable if we don't try to do something to stop the people who are enacting this destruction on us.
Right.
Now, just to make this make practical sense,
Mhm,
if I say, okay, I want my son, he wants to be a doctor. I want to encourage him in becoming a doctor. That's great. So what kind of life does he want? Well, he wants to make decent money so he can provide for himself, live a comfortable life. He probably wants to have a wife and children and wants to be able to provide for them. Well, at some point along his development, if I
yeah.
don't teach him, look,
If your son decides he wants to be a doctor, and that's when you started to break up. You talked about the virtues, and then you talked about what you would want him to know if he decided that's what he wanted to do.
yeah, yeah, and not remembering exactly where I was, I do
Mhm,
remember the three main points. So you were asking what things is it important for my son to learn, in my opinion.
mhm,
The first thing I gave you was not just knowing virtues, but embodying a set of virtues.
mhm,
The second thing was knowing about the history of Black people.
mm,
And the important takeaway message is not the specific factoids that we often give about Black history,
mhm,
but having an accurate understanding of where we have been racially throughout
mhm.
history.
Yeah.
So where we have done great things, what those great things were, when we had done them,
Mhm,
so a time frame. And for me, that puts our current condition in context
mhm,
so that rather than looking at our plight as, permanently at the bottom of important indicators,
mhm,
historically we've been at the top of most important indicators
mhm,
on the world stage. Where we are now is really numerically a blip in history.
mm,
But that leads to the third thing, and that is what we can and should do, or what we should know to get out of our current condition.
mhm,
The essence of the message is twofold. That number one, we're not responsible for our condition in the sense that we woke up and decided to be at the bottom of every indicator.
mm,
Okay. So that the onus for that rests with primarily Western European powers,
mm,
white people, and Arabs to a degree as well.
mhm,
Our culpability in that is that our response to that onslaught has not been appropriate.
mhm,
We have essentially lived an existence for the past 400 years or so where there's a group of people waging war on us. And rather than defending ourselves or waging war back, we're trying to love them out of warring against us. And
mm,
that's not how life works. And so I think if we're going to raise young men who can be of service to themselves and their families and their community, they've got to have a dispassionate understanding of the world they live in
mhm,
and be willing to say and do things that may make other people uncomfortable, that will almost certainly make other people uncomfortable.
mhm,
But if my well-being is contingent upon your discomfort, you're gonna
mhm,
be uncomfortable.
mhm.
I'm not gonna sacrifice my well-being just so that you can be comfortable.
Well,
But that's what we're currently raising our sons and daughters to a lesser degree. But I stress sons here because you're asking me about sons in particular, and also because in a biologically, men are wired to do the very thing that we're telling them not to do. Men are wired to confront hostile forces, uncomfortable circumstances, and to provide for and protect their wives, their families, and their communities. And we are essentially teaching them that it's wrong to do that and it's wrong to think in terms of doing that. That's a
wow.
problem.
Wow, you said a lot of things there. Well, first of all, let me respond to the last thing because I'm fascinated by, even though, we're science education researchers, we've come to realize the historical context is so important. right, as we delve into it. But what have found fascinating is when you talk about wiring, wiring is one of those things that it's been interesting to what should I say? Not necessarily study, but to see where the indicators for those are. I say that because, when we talk about Africa, we're talking about there's sections, of course, that are matriarchal, right? And there are other sections that are patriarchal. And one of the things that I've done by talking to historians is seeing how our roles in many ways have been different from them now. And I think, because in saying that, when you talk about wiring, like, oh, we're talking about gender roles now. And even one of the things I've learned is seeing how even our gender roles have shifted, because I think I observe the conflict that sometimes people experience having grown up in, and even having our predisposition be towards maybe, in some cases, more matriarchal, right? And more the peaceful side, versus growing up in a world with patriarchal ideals. I almost observe a conflict even, within our own culture itself, where people are predispositioned to be one way, but sometimes are trying to acquire a predisposition that is more respected within our society, you know? And feel free to, and I'll talk a little, just feel free to stop me at any point, you want to jump in, but I'm just kind of sharing some of that perspectives. I think that's something we still, even as a culture, need to work out, because it's been interesting, as I delve into different types of research to really understand what's going on and why. I'm tempted to suggest and believe that when we try so hard to align, if we're part of the Africa that's more matriarchal, and we're trying so hard to align with patriarchal predispositions and orientations, it's almost as if I observe a conflict even within ourselves, within even the way we respect, the matriarchs in our society, because that's a big thing. So, I mean, we're like, wow, going into gender issues, there's like a whole lot of podcasts there, But I can say, based on what you said, when you talk about character, one of the things that sometimes concerns me, when you're saying with us needing to do more for ourselves, is seeing even some of our strivings and some of our goals and how they sometimes align with trying to obtain that symbolism, that symbolic nature that impacts on our progress, right? And I say that because what's sometimes troubling to me is exactly when we try to achieve that without making sure that the character accompanies it, right? For example, if we trump talking about Black pride, but then we do what the same thing, we replicate what white Western culture is doing, in terms of aiming for that symbolism versus aiming for that character. I almost observed in our culture, having been in different spaces, how we sometimes run into trouble, creating
Catherine, let
a
me
conflict.
just so I'm say our culture. You're
Uh-huh.
referring to our culture as Western culture, or our culture in terms of African culture?
Our culture in terms of African culture in a Western setting.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. Because it's been interesting to see that there are different aspects to it, right? And it's interesting to see how, and I say that because, for some of the research I've done, I get to see how, for example, and I know people are not going to like this, how white Western culture aligns more, the goals align more with aspects of the people we other, for example, right? Because we have the matriarchal part um, of African culture, and then we have the patriarchal part of African culture, right? And so the patriarchies, there's an alignment in those types of thinking. One of the things that concern me, even with character, is sometimes the erosion is very subtle. And the erosion tends to, let's say, for example, we want to make sure we have our children, have character, right? Whether it's honesty and the different virtues you mentioned. And it's important for a lot of reasons, because first of all, those virtues are good in of themselves. But in attempts to progress, if we think we're going to acquire that by being less than virtuous, we don't realize that less than virtuous nature, even if it's allowable in one culture, it's not necessarily allowable in ours. It's more easily manipulated and can lead to our own destruction,
Mhm.
right? Wait, do you look like you were going to say something?
No, I'm listening and I'm following you. And if you want me to, I can say something.
Go ahead.
So there's a number of thoughts that come to mind with
Mhm.
what you've shared, and I'll share a couple of points. One thing I'll comment to on the role of culture, and this is important, I think, for parents who, when I'm asked to speak to parents, or when I have a group of parents that follow the books that I write, and so I send regular messages to them with ideas of parenting ideas.
Mhm. Nice.
And when I do that, I understand that there are levels to which parents are going to make change and not make change.
Mhm.
I fast. I do a 7-day fast 2 to 4 times a year. My wife think I'm crazy. She said I'm never gonna fast not one day if I got food. So I would not go to parents and say, hey, you must fast, because I know a lot of them do that. All right. So I contextualize what I'm going to say with that understanding. All right. We can try to embrace the idea that there is a Black American culture and try to adhere to the Black American culture. A lot of us do that. I think it's a problematic approach.
Mhm.
I think it's problematic because the culture that we identify as Black American culture is actually a poor white European culture.
Mm.
And I think what's his name? Thomas Sowell was one of the first people to that I'm aware of that
Mhm.
wrote about,
Mhm.
which he identified the way that the British gentry looked at the lower class Brits. The lower class Brits were the ones who had most close proximity to slaves. They were the overseers.
Mhm.
And so the characteristics that we attribute to ourselves as Black Americans are
Mhm.
actually just poor white British character traits that we have claimed for ourselves
Mhm.
based on the proximity that we had to them.
Mhm.
One example, Bernie Mac, who I thought was a great comedian, had some stuff that wasn't good for us culturally. One of the jokes was that white man break, he take a 15-minute break, he go eat his cheese sandwich, and he go right back to work.
Mhm.
So he's saying it as an insult to whites, but really the message is whites are industrious. And
Mhm.
comedy was that you shouldn't be industrious. And then the follow up to the joke was that nah, Black people, when we take a break, we break. Like never go back to work. So the thing that he's presenting to us that we should embrace is this idea that we don't want to work. We lazy. We're not industrious.
Mm.
Maybe there's a space for it in comedy, but I think all too often we embrace these ideas as real manifestations of how we should be as people.
Mm.
And so with now, I'm going back to where I say this is
Mhm.
there's level. Everybody not going to do it all. There is a level of psychology to good parenting.
Mhm.
And I can tell my son, look, working hard is important for you to be a good person.
Mhm.
Now he's human.
Mhm.
Human being, no, nothing in nature wants to work hard.
Mhm.
Water don't flow uphill because that's work. It requires energy. Water flows downhill
Mhm.
because it doesn't require any additional energy. The energy is already there, right? Everything in nature is the same way. People, animals. I'm not going to walk 5 miles to get food if I can walk, 5 meters and get food.
Mhm.
This is what to do.
Right.
But to grow, we sometimes have to exert more energy than what's easy.
Mhm.
If I want my son to have the attitude that he must work harder, I can't just say work harder
Mhm.
because there's thousands, tens of thousands of years of evolution built into him that's not going to make him want to do that. But
Mm.
there's a psychological trick I can use to help him do that.
Mhm.
Marriage, lazy people. I said, man, look at them lazy people. I would never want to be like that. I wouldn't even want them in my house. I don't even like talking to people who lazy like that. What you think we should do? You think we should do this work, or think we should just go ahead and take the easy way out? It's mine. He's thinking, man, I sure don't want to take the easy way out. But my father just told me he don't even want to talk to somebody who take the easy way out. And so when it comes to these issues of culture, I think what we sometimes embrace as Black culture, we have to stigmatize in a negative way. And it's not in a false way. We're not making anything up when we say, look, that is some poor white trash behavior. Now, you can do that if you, but understand that where it comes from is not our ancestors. This is what was given to slaves by the poor white trash who was made to whip them when
Mm.
they got. Now, do you want to do that? And usually they're not going to say, they're going to say, no, I don't really want to do that. Okay, so how do we want to do this?
Mhm.
All right, so that's the first point I wanted to make. And the reason I say that and stress it is because virtues are hard. And you alluded to when you said there's going to be this natural erosion. Of course, there's going to be erosion. Don't nobody want to do no hard work. And this we shouldn't be ashamed of saying that. That's a normal biological disposition that we have.
Mm.
The second thing I wanted to speak to was this idea of, and this also comes from the white culture that we're enmeshed in, this distinction between matriarchy and patriarchy.
Mhm.
If we look, and when I say look at history, I would say you could even go back to Herodotus,
Mhm.
who wrote history at the time of the Greeks.
Mhm.
Herodotus is very clear in documenting how these various white tribal groups lived for what was then the known world that he traveled, mostly around the Mediterranean and some of the outlying areas. They did not have a concept of a man and woman working together side by side. Their concept was that somebody has to be superior. Is
Mhm.
the man superior? Is the woman going to be superior? I mentioned to you earlier that my wife and I, for our honeymoon, we did a study trip to ancient Kemet.
Mhm.
When you're in Kemet, many times the Sultan, that was our word for king, what the Greeks called the pharaoh.
Mhm.
Many Sultan was depicted in a statue. Very often, the Sultan was not alone. Who do you think was next to the Sultan in them statues? It was his queen.
Mhm.
And almost always they were sitting there side by side, holding hands. In many African cultures, I will say it this way, there are some African cultures that are patriarchal, meaning that possessions run through the male line, naming runs through the male line, the village that the family is a member of runs through the male line.
Mhm.
There are other African cultures where things that are matriarchal in that those things run through the female line.
Mhm.
So that run through the female line.
Mhm.
Sport runs through the female line. And there's good reason for both models.
Mhm.
Rarely have I seen, I'm not talking about African cultures that have been subjected to colonial ideas.
Mhm.
I'm talking about African culture prior to colonization by the Europeans.
Mhm.
Very often, there's no sense that in matriarchal cultures, women are superior,
Mhm.
or in patriarchal cultures, men are superior.
Mhm.
It's just a different way of organizing the things of import in the society.
Mhm. Absolutely.
And so for us, what I think this current society is getting away from, there's been such a push against, I'll say, gender roles, but really the push is against biological gender.
Mhm.
And it may be sometimes couched as gender roles,
Mhm.
but testosterone is a hormone in the body that makes the body function a certain way.
Mhm.
Proof for this is when you have the sex people that do the sex change,
Mhm.
and if you who now has to take testosterone, there's been some anecdotal reports where they say, "Man, this testosterone. When I take testosterone, it makes me much more sexually aggressive.
Mhm.
It much more hostile."
Mhm.
I saw one video of a man who was taking estrogen who transitioned to being a woman, saying that he was having difficulty controlling his emotions. He said, "I would just be in a meeting, just break down crying, didn't know why."
Mhm.
Because you a man, a woman load of hormones that for you as a woman, Catherine, it
Mhm.
took, I don't know, 20, 30 plus years to learn how to manage them hormones.
Mhm.
Women should be glad that men don't go around knocking each other and other people out because testosterone gives you so much energy and so much drive. You have to learn how to control and manage that influx of hormone.
Or don't they? But anyway, go ahead.
I mean, there are a few that do, but quite honestly, it's not at all the norm. It's not at all
All right, I know what you mean. I'm just yeah.
the strength of the, I'll call it a drug just to help
Mhm.
emphasize the point, right? Give them the strength of the drug.
Mhm.
And so my point, what I would emphasize to parents of boys is realize that they're boys. Let them be boys. Let them do boy things.
Mhm.
Boys say, "Oh man, I'm
Mhm.
gonna off the top step of the porch." I'll look and be sure there's no bricks or rocks up underneath and say, "Okay, go ahead." And I'll brace myself and be prepared that he might come back with a skin up knee. He might twist something.
Right.
And then we want to monitor that. You can jump from the top of the porch. Son, the roof is probably a little too high for you to jump off of. Let's work
Mm.
up to that. Hopefully, we'll never work up to. But we can't wrap him in bubble wrap and yellow tape. I think he's going to go through life because we're really restricting what that drug, that hormone is pushing, driving him to do. I
Right.
want to share this with the audience. There's
Mhm.
a book by Carol Hooven. Carol Hooven's a researcher at Harvard. The
Mm.
book is called T, The Story of Testosterone. The Hormone Dominates and Divides Us. It's a phenomenal book, and I encourage to read it. Not only parents of girls too, because your
Mhm.
daughters want to interacting with these boys and have a good sense and appreciation
Yeah.
for what comes in this whole package that we boys and men.
Mhm. And that brings me to something when we're talking about the education space because I know exactly what you're talking about. Can see the difference between when I spend enough time, with my son versus if I don't spend enough time. I see the difference. I see the level of calm. I see the level of just in terms of, even controlling his emotions. Our expectation within the classroom, for example, if we use that analogy, is we do expect Black boys to behave more, more like the girls, right?
Yes.
To be much calmer, to be much more restrained, to be much more reserved. And so the truth is, I've also been operating with that in mind. Operating with, if I talked to his dad and I said, look, you can do all that guy stuff, but, him, he's as a Black boy, he can't just do what you're doing, right? And have it be viewed as normal boy characteristic as a Black
Right.
boy versus no. I've seen the allowances, and having him go to private school and the things. I'll give you an example. One of the things I observed, if we were to compare predominantly a school predominantly Black boys, people with predominantly white boys, one of the things I observed is when the pandemic was over, those schools with predominantly white boys, they got additional outdoor playtime, right? They
Yes.
got additional play activities. They got tons of stuff that they got to do outdoor. Things were organized so that with the understanding that they were missing being with each other, with the understanding they'll be jumping off the wall, right? So they got additional playtime outdoor. The opposite happened, for classes with predominantly Black boys, right? Where instead of having that opportunity, to socialize and to adjust and regulate their emotions, they were immediately controlled, expected to sit down there and work. And I listened to the news and all the stuff, and then I'm thinking, well, I'm sure this is what's happening because this is generally what happens in a public school, right? They are expected to sit back there and go back to work. I mean, these other schools with the white kids, they had additional periods for play.
Mhm.
Whereas I'm sure these others, they weren't having additional periods to play. They were more like, wow, they've fallen so far behind that they need to make sure that we give them more math, more English, more literacy, right?
Yes.
And so, these are the things I think about, even as parents trying to prepare our sons. And I'm only focusing on boys intentionally, mainly because I think even though I was, a female in the K-12 space, I started to realize, in terms of raising a boy, wow, even I didn't really have that concept of, okay, well, a boy's gonna do this because, not so because he's just functioning differently, right?
Yes.
And we often don't have that, right? Oh, they often don't have that, right? And
Yes.
so they're forced to, in so many ways, go against the grain of who they are in development. And oftentimes, we as parents, we try to help them adjust and cater to a world that, don't have that consideration for their development.
Right.
And that being masculine, the more masculine, is considered negative. I mean, think about it. Those African countries have female presidents, before we probably will ever get to that because of the way we embrace and because of what's important.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I'll share another book that I falls in line with what you're sharing about gender and education spaces.
Hmm.
The author is Christina Hoff Summers.
Okay.
Summers is Sommers. And the
Hmm.
book is called The War Against Boys.
Mm.
The War Against Boys, How Misguided Feminism is Harming Our Young Men. I came to see the problem here the same as you as an educator
Hmm.
in the structure of schools. I don't know that well, Hoff Summers would say it has been intentional, but schools are predominated by women. Most of the teachers, I think 80% are female, white females in particular.
Elementary.
It, and so much of the expectation is based on the people who are setting the expectations. And so yeah, there is, I mean, even just the idea that you're going to be in school from, I don't know, 8 to 3 every day,
Hmm.
and you're going to do most of your work seated at a desk, and if you get up and walk around too much, then you're a problem. That structurally is wired against boys.
Hmm.
I will say though, for parents of boys, Black boys in particular, who have children in schools, my belief is that every Black parent is a homeschooler,
Hmm.
whether they go to school or not. And so we need to spend a lot of time when our children are home with us, first making sure that they do have time with us at home,
Hmm.
but when they're home with us, shoring up what's not done in the schools.
Hmm.
And so it's vital that we have space for our children to go run and play,
Mhm.
or we create space for them to go run and play,
Mhm.
that we spend a lot of time wearing them out, especially in the summertime. I mean,
Mhm.
when they get home, they should fall out, passed out, sleep. That means they did a lot of running and playing and working outdoors in the sun. But they need that for their physiological and their psychological development.
Mm.
And I don't I don't think that we should remove, I don't think we should put them at unnecessary risk, but it's very dangerous for their development to remove risk from the equation. That's how human beings learn, is by having some risk. And I tell my sons that my job as a parent is to ensure that you don't aren't exposed to irreparable risk.
Mhm.
They say, well, what does that mean? Irreparable. It
Mhm.
means you can't repair it. So I'll say, ride your bike down the hill fast. And if you fall off the bike and you skin your knee and scratch your elbow, that will heal.
Mhm.
But I'm not going to let you ride your bike down the hill in the traffic, because if you get hit by a car, that we can't fix that. And they get the message. So daddy doesn't mind watching you. It's hard to do it, but I will watch you do something and think to myself, boy, he about to get jacked up.
Mm.
But I won't let you get jacked up to the point where you have something that won't heal. The reason risk is important is because those cues are sent to the brain, and that's what the brain is going to respond to.
Mhm.
Okay, don't do this in this way again, because that will lead to a problem.
Mhm.
And if their space is too safe, their brain doesn't learn to navigate these unsafe spaces.
Mm. Wow. It's interesting. I could see that also working double fold, right? In terms of their space being too safe. Because sometimes, yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, I'm thinking of the flip side too. Because being in safe spaces, and I know you're not thinking of safety necessarily in that way, like being in an unsafe space, but it's also helped create a contrast between expectation about what is safe and what is not, right? In other words, with that contrast sometimes comes a degree of acceptability or not acceptable, right? If and I when I say safe, I'm talking about safe in terms of the experiences sometimes that we go through for being black, right?
Are you speaking of physical safety, psychological, emotional?
I'm thinking mostly psychological, mostly.
Okay. Okay.
But for some people, while it might be psychological and emotional for us. For some people, it may be physical too, right?
Yeah.
Because different levels of danger. Because sometimes having that safety net growing up can instruct you to not go into that danger zone or to come out of that danger zone. And so the question is, how do you get that balance to have high expectations to see that that's a danger for everyone versus low expectations of, yes, I've been in a danger zone. This is what I expect. This is what I see. And I think about the difference between someone who's focused on building infrastructure versus even someone who is surviving, right?
Yeah. Here's what I'll say though, and of course, without knowing specifics, it's hard to determine what that line is, and that's something that each parent's going to have to decide on for themselves in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we should think through in advance what our individual lines are. A person won't learn what danger is unless they have some reason to know the consequence of the danger. You don't always have to know the consequence by experiencing it yourself personally.
Mm-hmm.
You can see somebody else experience it and, okay, I don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's no indication anywhere in life of the danger, then when they first encounter it, they're not going to know that it should be avoided. Or sometimes danger can't be avoided; it has to be navigated. They're not going to know how to navigate it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for example, we have some metal poles in the yard,
Mm-hmm.
and they sit out in the sun, and they get very hot.
Mm-hmm.
Tell my younger son, we need to move those poles,
Mm-hmm.
but you might want to get something because they're hot.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes over and grabs a pole and drops it, yelling, "Oh, burn me! I didn't know it was hot." I said,
Mm-hmm.
"I told you it was hot. What you want me to do?" Now you
Yeah.
know when
Right.
you see metal that's in the sun, it's going to be hot, and you got to figure out how to handle it. All right. So could I have protected him from that? Of course, I could have. But I want you to develop a sensitivity and awareness to this potential danger. Now he will never forget that lesson. Not to touch hot metal like that. In fact, that may even transfer to other things. There may be other materials. I wonder, can I touch this? I might approach it more gingerly. So the long and short of it is, and that did not really happen. I just made that up.
Mm-hmm.
But the long and short of it is, children do need to be exposed to. They need to actually be put in some of these situations to better not just appreciate, but for the mind to actually internalize the danger, and then develop strategies for navigating it. I will also add that I asked the question initially if you were referring to physical, emotional,
Mm-hmm.
psychological.
Yeah.
Our children need to be exposed to all these various forms of danger.
Mm.
As adults, we got jobs, we work with people. I'm just going to say we work with crazy people
Mm-hmm.
of all types. Sometimes the crazy people work under us. Sometimes they're at our same level. Sometimes they're our supervisors and bosses.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have to figure out how do we navigate this person's issue.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if create an environment for 18 years for a child for 18 years where you never deal with somebody who's psychologically abusive, then
Mm-hmm.
what do you do when you turn 20 and you got to deal with some psychologically abusive people or some people who are emotionally abusive?
Yeah.
So even if it means they need to recognize some of the traits in these people,
Mm-hmm.
I look at that as an essential life skill.
Mm. Yeah. I guess because I grew up very sheltered, I guess I disagree with that. And we could always say, we'll have another session to talk about it. I disagree with because I've seen it where and I'm not saying protect him from everything, but I suppose as a somewhat, and this is where it becomes interesting. I think I fall in the middle. I'm an overprotective parent, but at the same time, I allow my son to have his experiences. Again, it's all relative, right? Because you can keep in mind, I have friends from different backgrounds. But at the same time, giving him exposure to experiences. It's interesting, though, to see how he develops his ideas without necessarily being exposed, right? And I think also and I think part of it is just being in that school environment, right? Where he's with different personalities and just being his normal everyday self in some ways, right?
Mhm.
I guess we all have different degrees of allowances. Where for me, I focus on allowing him to have those positive experiences that I feel will help his development later on and prepare him for some things that are more challenging,
Yeah.
right? Because the nice thing about it, and here's the thing I learned as a parent, I learned that my son is actually a better at choosing who should be his friends than when he's been in situations where he became friends with kids because I was friends with their parents.
Mm.
I realized that a couple of years ago, and I was like, wow, I need to change this, and so I started making the steps to, really even if it meant, just moving on and having him move forward from, where I was able to reflect on my own decision making and seeing how my own decision making affected that and how he makes his choices. But also seeing that in his environment and helping him to understand that in his environment, you're pretty much going to become whoever you're hanging out with, right? It's going to be hard to avoid becoming that, because I see so much of raising a child as helping to develop habits.
Yes.
And those habits later on are just as hard to break, right? And even if it meant helping him to choose, you're going to move on from that friendship or keep that friendship, learning to realize it's okay to move on too. And I don't even know what we were talking about. I won't let me hear, but I think we were just sharing ideas.
So I'm curious to know, Catherine, how old is your son? Yeah. Yeah. I don't think we disagree at all. I
Mhm.
think we're in agreement. And
Okay.
you said that it's an issue of degree,
Mhm.
and also that it's going to vary from one context to the next and from one parent to the next. And
Mhm.
that's my position as well.
Mhm.
So I think we're having a vehement agreement.
Oh, good. Yeah, well, all of this is meant for clarification. There's one more thing I meant to clarify too, because when you use the word laziness, which could be offensive for some people, right?
Yes.
One of the things I've learned is with 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 my son, what I viewed as being lazy is it's not because he's lazy about something, because he's pursuing whatever it is he's doing with such intent, right? And with such motivation, just not this other thing that I want him to do, right? And so the question became, so how did I, rechannel those energies, those goals, those motivations, right, into something else that maybe a society review as more acceptable when it comes to progressing, right?
Mm. Mhm.
I meant to address that because I know we'll have people who hear that who will be offended, which is okay. But I guess I was also a little bit like, well, like, no, like that's what the world's been calling us lazy. And I
Yeah.
know you don't mean that. And I'm saying that intentionally because I know you don't mean that's how Black people are, but some people can construe that. And again, having read one of your papers where you actually talk about people be focusing on negative attributes, right, and psychological antecedents. That's your word. I quote that paper that you wrote quite a bit, by the way. So I
Thank
wanted to clarify that you're not saying, this is how Black people are.
No, not at all. I think that, I mean, the point I was making earlier is that what's portrayed about us is not who we are inherently. It's not who we've been historically, but I would argue it's who we are becoming, who we are fast becoming. There's so much I could say about that. And I've had a number of instances the past few days, which are solidifying this idea
Mm-hmm.
in my mind. And much of what we are experiencing as a race of people is not only us. It's
I
just
was
the
about
large
to say,
society that we're in. I
yes.
mean, we were talking about boys and black boys and the war against boys. That's written for all boys.
Mm-hmm.
But you gave an example where it's exacerbated for black boys. So much of the challenges we see are just hitting us harder and they're
Mm-hmm.
more pronounced given the way we're currently positioned. One of the there's a quote I think the coach was Tom Landry. It was one of the older Tom Landry era football coaches,
Mm-hmm.
and he was asked how he sees his job as a coach,
Mm-hmm.
and he said basically, my job is to make a group of men do what they don't want to do in order to achieve what they want to achieve. And that's a very powerful way of looking at
Mm-hmm.
your job as a coach. It's a powerful way of looking at your job as a parent.
Absolutely.
And so everybody wants the big fancy car, the
Mm-hmm.
big paycheck, every boy wants the beautiful woman to be his wife.
Mm-hmm.
Those things require work. It requires us doing things we don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Ronnie Coleman said, everybody want to be a bodybuilder, but don't nobody want to lift them heavy weights. And so what that suggests for me is that one of the important things that we can do as parents
Mm-hmm.
is to give our children opportunities to embrace, well, first, expose them to hardship,
Mm-hmm.
require them to navigate, work through hardship, and in time, give them the opportunity to embrace the hardship. Let me
Mm.
explain what I mean when I say hardship, because
Yeah.
that might sound offensive to a lot of people too, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't take a 12-year-old and say, look, go run 6 miles. He might be able to do it, but it's a lot. I might say, look, the next month, you're going to run a mile. You're going to run a mile a day, 5 days a week. And then that's say the first week. Okay, the first week. And then maybe the second week, I said, we're going to increase that to 2 miles. Then we're going to increase it to 3 miles. What happens, even if you don't try, your body and your mind adjust to running 1 mile. So by the time you've done it 5 times, the fifth time, it's like, oh, I can't believe this was ever hard for me. It's pretty easy.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time you get to the end of 5 days doing 2 miles, this is pretty easy to me. But it requires somebody pushing you
Mm-hmm.
that first step. Get up off the couch. We're going to run this mile.
Mm-hmm.
And pushing you every step after that. I played soccer in high school, and our coach required, if you were going to make the team, you had to run 3 miles in 20 minutes. And it seemed, as a freshman, it seemed impossible. As an eighth grader, we looked at all the upperclassmen who made the team, like, man, you ran all that distance in that short amount of time, and you
Mm-hmm.
made the team. After having done it, I realized, oh, it's not that bad. After the third day, your body starts to adjust. The fourth, fifth day, it actually becomes, when I say easy, it's easy within context.
Mm-hmm.
You can run it, you're out of breath, but you catch your breath within the first 3 to 5 minutes of
Mm-hmm.
having finished. What happens in our current society is the moment something becomes difficult or challenging, we
Mm-hmm.
take away the challenging task.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I can't remember. I think my wife, who's also an educator, she was working
Mm-hmm.
with a group of teachers, and they were saying the biggest challenge they have this summer with their kids is that they can't write. They don't have the patience to sit down and write a couple
Mm-hmm.
paragraphs. I mean, dog, you can't sit at a desk in the air conditioner in the summertime and write 2 paragraphs?
Mm-hmm.
We are failing as educators and as parents if we are
Mm-hmm.
producing a generation who can't deal with the difficult task of writing two
Mm-hmm.
paragraphs.
Yeah.
Right. And so we see anecdotally a lot of these instances where we are producing adults who aren't able to navigate hardship.
Mm-hmm.
One last point I'll make in this vein. I talked about the big picture and how we should see ourselves as our current condition is just a blip and we can return to a great condition. We're
Mhm.
not going to be able to get to no great condition if we can't do no work.
Nope.
Because it requires work to do that. But for those of us who are willing to embrace this work as a challenge and as an opportunity, we have a tremendous opportunity
Mhm.
because now we are competing against people who don't really have who are not predisposed to doing any level of work and very little hardship.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm not just talking about running 6 miles, which I think
Mm-mm.
would be good.
Yeah.
Every young man 18 years old who's able-bodied should be able to run 6 7 miles.
Mhm.
Every child who's able to sit and hold a pen should be able to write a few paragraphs, an eloquent essay. But our competition is moving to the place where they cannot do that.
Right.
So if we as parents ensure that our children are able to engage in various levels of hardship, be able to at least understand why they're doing the hardship, be able
Mhm.
to observe and look and say, I do see the benefit of doing the hardship. I'm
Mhm.
not saying you ever have to like it.
Right.
I don't think Ronnie Coleman ever liked lifting the weight.
Yeah.
He may have liked the consequence of lifting the weights. He didn't like the
Mhm.
weights. They were heavy. But if you can appreciate the outcome and be able to make yourself go in and do that task, we have a tremendous advantage, as
Absolutely.
individuals and as a race of people.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So yes, I completely agree. I completely agree. And I really, that's one of the things I do talk about to different people. The fact that we think that to get students up to a level, a certain level, that we do that by making it easy for them
Right.
instead of really figuring out how to not only help them embrace the challenge, but how to help them prepare for that challenge.
Yes.
I'm completely aligned with that because that's exactly why, one of the main reasons why I took my son out of school and decided to homeschool him because
Mm,
I felt like, okay, you need to be trained to be able to sit and do this, right? You need to
right.
be trained how to, one, set boundaries for yourself, know there's a
Yeah.
time and place for everything, practice self-control. And he does. He has a lot of self-control for his age, right? I constantly hear, yeah, he just sits there quietly and does his work,
Yeah.
which is, the danger of it too, because, the kid who sits quietly gets ignored because, because they're not disruptive. So that's a different problem to have, right?
Yes.
And yeah, it's so much a part of our culture. Now, the dangers and the things that I'm concerned about is we are so good at figuring out a way to turn that around and to change the value of things, right? To make sure some people are on top and that some things become more valuable, right?
Mm,
And let me say this, and this is unfortunately what the cycle I think society is stuck on. Society changes what's valuable depending on who's benefiting from it, whether or not it has to do with character or lack of, right? But go ahead, look like you're going to say something.
well, I'm thinking about the idea that you're giving, and I want to say yes and no
Okay.
for
Please do.
sure.
Hopefully. I hope I'm wrong. It's great
Well,
to be wrong. Yeah.
if we seek our value in what white society will acknowledge and reward, then
Mhm.
we're very susceptible to falling short because those
Mm.
values.
Yeah.
I'm of the mindset though that nature imposes a value on itself that
Mm.
supersedes what any specific society or people in society would advocate.
What do you mean?
You said meaning?
Yeah, what do you mean when nature impose a value? But go ahead, you were saying.
Yeah, okay. Perseverance,
Mm.
sticking with a task.
Okay.
That's not a value that whites say, hey, we value people who stick with a task. Nature says that. Nature says, look, I'm gonna give you some problems that are hard to figure out. And you're
Mhm.
not gonna figure me out in 5 10 minutes. You need to spend 5 or 10 years to figure me out. And the person that spends 5 or 10 years on the problem are the ones more likely to figure it out.
Mm.
We can look at the history of science to see that there are some challenges, some problems, some conundrums
Mhm.
that just somebody sticking with it for an abnormally long period of time
Mhm.
for it to figure it out. Nikola Tesla is one example.
Mhm.
I forget his name, but the mathematician who discovered Fermat's last theorem.
Mm.
This man pulled himself up from his colleagues and said, we didn't see him for like 7 years. And just one day he came out and started interacting with us again. He figured it was close enough that he could start sharing what he was working on.
Yeah.
And that's just perseverance. So I wouldn't shy away from it because of the possibility that
No, absolutely
society,
not.
the white society, could change the valuation. The
Absolutely
example we
not.
gave was writing. I've had it argued back to me that kids may not need to really learn to write anymore because all their stuff can be written by AI. That's true. I can write essays better than many of our college students, but it doesn't replace the human ability to communicate an idea.
Mm-hmm.
So AI can write a paragraph or an essay. Can AI originate and can it create an original idea? Can it represent something novel?
Mm-hmm.
It's not at that point yet.
No,
And
it's
so
not.
my point is that nature still values some of those basic traits,
Mm-hmm.
some of those rewards that are only won by harder work, by more perseverance, by those virtues that we talk
Mm-hmm.
about. Yeah.
Right. Wow. And I might even dare say that they're even more important now, right? Because it's such an opportune time that even if people who are innovative, who can monetize on the innovation, get ahead by doing so, it's the progress and the reach is going to be better for those societies and for those cultures who have where people have allowed themselves to build, right? Because then they could be more innovative,
Hmm.
and they could use it better. But I guess in the end, it'll all boil down to not just the talent, but the resources to
Hmm.
control those talents, right?
Yeah.
And direct the control of those talents. But I But yeah, I'm in complete agreement with you with that. I don't believe that those are determinants. I always express my ideas and pour some more out. Well, we are coming to a close, and I want to thank you for joining. And before we end, any last minute things? I know we're going to have the opportunity to meet again. And so we'll have a follow up. I don't know if you want to leave people with anything, things to think about. I will share this out before we meet to see if those who have questions, concerns, things you said, who want to respond. But any
I
last,
will share.
yeah.
I'll share one resource that I think may be useful for some of your readers. If readers are interested in my any of my research work, go to my research lab website. It's www.es2rp.org. E is in Edward, S is in Sam, R is in radio, 2RP.
And I will add those. Dr. Mutegi, thanks for joining Learning for Truth and Love. If you like this episode, I want to remind everyone to like it and to subscribe so you can be notified of the next episode. So thank you for joining us today.
Okay. Bye bye.
All right.